So I'm Carrie Soderman and I work in the Earth Science department. And I would describe myself as a mantle geochemist. I'm interested in all the processes that link the chemistry of erupted rocks and rocks that nearly erupt but don't quite, to the processes that control their evolution in the mantle below. So I'm interested in, for example, the chemical composition of these rocks, the isotopic composition of these rocks, and what that can tell us about what's happening in the Earth below, both parts of the crust, which are quite shallow, and deep in the mantle, maybe thousands of kilometers beneath our feet. And really, I try and link aspects of modeling the behavior, the thermodynamic behavior of these melts as they rise through the Earth and start to crystallize, aspects of geochemistry, and aspects of petrology, which is the study of these samples down a microscope. And there are two parts that I'm really interested in that my research has gone down. One is thinking about basalts that are produced in ocean island volcano settings. So these are places such as Hawaii or Galapagos, where we get volcanoes in the middle of tectonic plates. And these basalts give us really important insights into what is going on thousands of kilometers beneath our feet in the mantle. And we can measure the chemistry of these rocks. And I'm also interested in a suite of particular igneous rocks that are rich in alkalis. And these are rocks that I'm focusing on in my fellowship. And these particular alkali-rich rocks are commonly found in places of continental rifting and continental collisions. And they can be really rich in rare earth elements, which are a group of elements that we need for a lot of aspects of modern technology. So one tool set we have to try and understand what's going on in the mantle is the isotope composition of the rocks that are erupted. And the isotope composition of these rocks, particularly of basalts, can be really useful to tell us the exact materials that are melting in the mantle to form these rocks. And this is because the isotope composition of rocks on the crust and rocks in the mantle, and also things like sediments on the Earth's surface, all have distinct isotope compositions. And we know from lots of geophysical observations that tectonic plates, the crust and sediments, are recycled back into the mantle. So this leaves an isotopic fingerprint within the mantle of these particular crustal rocks. And so if we measure the isotope composition of what is being melted what's being produced when we melt the mantle, we can use these isotope compositions to try and trace signatures of this recycled crust. So we can try and identify, for example, where on Earth we see these signatures of recycled tectonic plates being melted and brought back up to the surface. And also we can try and put constraints on when this process happened and how much of this material might actually be brought back up to the surface. And traditionally, when we talk about isotope geochemistry, lots of geologists for many years have used long-lived radiogenic isotopes. So these are isotope systems where we get producing different elements through radioactive decay. That's been the traditional toolkit for geochemists. But over the past decade or so, we've been able to use stable isotope systems. And this is what I developed a big interest in during my PhD, is using certain stable isotope systems of rocks, things that do not radioactive decay, and using these to trace certain particular minerals and big, for example, blocks of crust that might be sitting in the mantle and being melted to form these rocks. So the other aspect of geochemistry that I'm interested in, particularly during my fellowship, is the behavior of certain elements in alkaline silicate rocks. These are a group of igneous rocks that are really rich in alkalis, and they also come associated with lots of elements such as rare earth elements. Now, if we want to try and understand how these rocks are forming and why certain types of these alkaline rocks contain lots of rare earth elements, we can try and piece together a model of how these liquids actually crystallize and form from the mantle. And so lots of my work currently is building up a thermodynamic model to try and understand the behavior of the melts that form these rocks. And so we can model the effects of temperature and pressure and composition, for example, maybe the amount of water, maybe the amount of alkalis or carbon in these rocks, and put together a picture of how these liquids would crystallize when we brought them up to the surface and produce the rocks we see today. And so we can use this modeling as a really important investigative tool to try and understand the controls on these systems of things like these parameters, pressure, temperature, water. But we can also then compare this to what we see in natural samples. So we can take natural rocks that we have from some of these alkaline-rich systems and we can measure data about the whole rock, and we can measure data about individual minerals and what forms those, and even patterns within individual minerals that tell us how these minerals grew. And we can piece this all together to try and understand what actually is controlling why some of these alkaline silicate rocks contain a lot of rare earth elements, why others do not, and the processes that might be going on to form this spectrum of rocks that we see. A really important part of my research is using natural samples, and this might be to help compare against our models and also test some of the hypotheses that we have. And up until this point in my fellowship, a lot of this has been using samples that have previously been collected on some of these rocks. But now that we have some understanding of how these systems behave, I can now think about places I might want to go and samples I might want to collect to really target knowledge gaps that we have. So a few weeks ago, I was in Malawi, and in Malawi, we have alkaline silicate rocks that are associated with the rifting of the East African rift, so where the African continent is slowly splitting apart. This is a really young geological feature, at least on the timescale of the Earth's history. And so this provides one really important case study for how some of these alkaline silicate rocks are forming. But going forwards, we also want to compare a whole suite of different systems. And alkaline silicate rocks are really useful because they are formed in a wide variety of tectonic settings. And so going forwards to next year, for example, we're thinking that we might be looking at fieldwork in places like Greenland and Namibia. And in these places, we have alkaline silicate rocks formed very differently through collisional or rifting or mantle plume settings. And this diversity allows us to investigate different controls on how these alkaline systems form and look at rocks that are formed in these different ways and provide a whole suite of different tests and natural samples to look at how these systems are forming. So rare earth elements are a really important group of elements for all aspects of modern technology. Not only are they found in mobile phones, but they're also found in things like the motors for wind turbines and large parts of IT infrastructure. And so these elements are going to become even more useful and important over the coming decades as we particularly try and transition towards more green energy technologies. Now, alkaline silicate rocks are known to be a fairly important source of these elements. They're not particularly mined there at the moment, but a large part of that is because we don't really understand why some of these alkaline silicate igneous rocks contain lots of rare earth elements and others don't. And so really my research is trying to feed into some of this understanding to try and fill some of the holes that might be useful to industry. For example, what tectonic setting should I be looking at if I want to see if I have a rare earth element rich alkaline silicate rock? What minerals are these elements held in the rock? And this can be important because some minerals are much easier to extract from rocks than others. So it's important exactly where these elements are held. And also trying to understand the diversity of these rare earth element rich rocks. Are there different types of them? How big are they? How do they form? And have they formed equally through Earth's history? All of these are really important questions for trying to build up a picture of how these rocks and the elements that they are concentrated in form. And this then is really important for feeding into a really holistic understanding of where industry might want to be looking if they want to look for more of these elements.